We will now begin our study session, again, for September the 24th. Again, I note that our council is present with the exception of Mr. Whitaker, who is excused. Item 1A on our agenda for this meeting is to hear a presentation and provide direction on a proposed text amendment to the Mesa 2040 General Plan. I know our planning staff has a presentation to make on this item. Is that correct, Mr. Brady?
That's correct. We'll turn it over to Nana.
Good morning, Mayor, Council. If you remember, we came to the Council in February to discuss the implementation of the general plan and its evaluation. As part of the general plan, the city is required to do a 3-year evaluation to see the successes of the plan and challenges that are being emerged as a result of the implementation of the plan. So based on that, we informed the council that we are working with the various city departments and do have recommendations to basically recommend adjustments to some of the challenges that we are facing as part of the implementation of the plan. So with that, we do have a recommendation that we are going to be presenting to you this morning. So with that, I'll pass it on to Rachel.
Good morning. So as Nana was saying, we were last here in February and we discussed the general plan with you and several of the projects that we were going to be working on this year. And we're back now with an update. We've been working throughout the year and meeting with various stakeholders and back to discuss those with you. And just as a little recap, when we were here in February, we briefly went over just some of the basic goals of the general plan and its purpose. And so, you know, the general plan is our official policy document that guides development within the city, and it's the expression of our community's goals and priorities. And as Nana was saying, the general plan requires that we do a comprehensive review every 3 years. And this is really to evaluate the efficacy of the plan and it provides us with an opportunity to make recommendations to the plan itself and to our implementation tools. So when we did that evaluation, we identified 2 areas that could use improvement, and those were Chapter 7, Community Character, and Chapter 16, Plan Implementation and Amendments. So Chapter 7, Community Character, this is really the land use guidance chapter of the general plan. But rather than focusing on parcel-specific land uses, it really focuses on the look and feel of areas to establish a character. And this really supports some of the goals of the general plan. And one of those is creating a sense of place. And how Chapter 7 does this is it outlines concepts of zoning, land use, building form, and intensity to really guide what those character areas should look like. And what you have here is we have 8 different character areas throughout the city, and you can see on this map kind of just how they're distributed throughout the community. But central to several of those character areas is this concept of mixed use. And when you think of mixed use, you might think of your general kind of really vibrant pedestrian-oriented mixed-use development, but this also can occur in more subtle ways. Within Chapter 7, the different character areas each have a list of primary and secondary zoning districts. And the primary zoning districts are intended to be really those main zoning districts used to establish the character. And the secondary zoning districts are meant to be really those supportive uses to help give it some of that vibrancy and to provide different uses that might be needed. And for example, so for the employment districts, as you can imagine, that the main point of that character area is to provide employment type uses. But within the general plan, it also allows for some commercial zoning within the employment districts. And that really was intentional to provide goods and services to employees so that they don't have to travel great distances if they, for say, want to go have lunch, grab something to eat at lunch. But what some of the challenges we've experienced have been is that within the general plan, it does not specify how much of the primary zoning district needs to be used within a character area. And as a result, we've been challenged by the development community where they come in with projects and they say, well, this secondary zoning is allowed, so I want to develop my entire project with this secondary zoning. And that may not seem like much of a problem, just as a one-by-one incidents, but incrementally, as you have these come in, it really can end up changing the character and the feel of those areas altogether away from what their intention was. And we talked about this kind of briefly back in February, where we expressed some of the pressure that we have seen within the department, the planning department, for conversion of areas into residential. And at that time, we shared with you our distribution of land uses. And this is just to show that we got updated data since we were last here in February, and you can see that residential uses have increased within the city. And if you're looking at this, you may say, well, yes, that's just coming out of vacant land. But in terms of our future land use and what we're trying to preserve and create, we can see that the data is showing just what we kind of explained anecdotally to you in February, is that we're seeing that this increase in residential use is really coming from our mixed-use character areas. So that's something that we want to address and preserve. And so what staff is recommending is we're recommending some refinements to the text to better describe the intent of those character areas. But then on top of that, we're proposing that we establish some minimum percentages of primary zoning and land uses for several of the character areas. So on the screen is a list of some of those character areas. And there's a unique outlier a little bit on the bottom here, which is the mixed-use community. So this is unique in itself, in that the mixed-use community is really those master plan communities like Cadence and Eastmark. And they have one zoning district that they can use to establish those. And with that zoning district, they create a plan and they specify different areas within that development and what uses are going to be in there. So in essence, they're creating their own zoning through this zoning itself. So as part of that, we're recommending that as part of their plan that they designate that 40% of that land should be dedicated for commercial use. And that really does help maintain those areas over time. Because with those mixed-use communities, often what happens is they come in with a bunch of amendments, so they have their overall concept for these communities, and then when they come closer to development, they want to make smaller changes, and just like we were saying earlier, incrementally, that can have a major effect. So this will help just kind of preserve some of that commercial use for those areas. So that is the first recommendation for amendments to the plan. And the second one is Chapter 16, which is Plan Implementation and Amendments. So this chapter describes all the various implementation tools, and it restates all the goals and policies that were provided in the various chapters in the general plan. It also provides the process for the review and update of the plan, and also the process for general plan amendments. So what was identified during the comprehensive review is that Chapter 16, and specifically the general plan amendment criteria, could really, it had a lot of room for improvement, to say it nicely. The criteria that was in there, it's pretty vague. And at the time, it doesn't seem that they really considered the context of the city. As you know, Mesa is rather large, and it's quite different on the east side than it is downtown. So there was that issue that wasn't really addressed. And then there really is kind of a lack of approval guidance within that document as well. So staff created a set of proposed amendments to this, and the first is to better refine the text to describe the amendment process. And the second piece of that is that we are proposing to create context-specific amendment requirements, and I'll go over that in just a second. and explain what that is. And then the third one is to provide approval criteria so that when we have these amendments come through, staff really has something that they can look at and, evaluate the proposals and before we come to council with our recommendations. So just something that is, providing that consistency in our decision-making. So as part of this process, what we did is we looked to surrounding communities to see how they dealt with their minor and their major amendments. So this is just giving you an idea of some of our comparable cities, I'd say. And what we ended up coming up with is a recommendation to create two different benchmarks. One being specific to the downtown and the transit district. And that really is intentional to capture the difference in scale of the built environment. So as I was saying earlier, the downtown and west side of town, it's very different in character than the east side. And so trying to apply a blanket acreage criteria may not be the most appropriate. So how we came up with these designations is in downtown where you have a more fine-grained development, we used an average block size as kind of a benchmark of what would be considered a major change to a downtown or our transit districts. And that's 10 acres. So that's what we're recommending is we use as our benchmark for what would be a major versus a minor amendment. And then in all other character areas, we're recommending that we lower our criteria to 160 acres for the benchmark for what is a major amendment. Right, currently it's 320 acres. I don't know if you saw back on this slide, but that's by and far the largest benchmark or designation of any community. That's a half section of land. And so what we're recommending is to come, more in line with surrounding communities and bring this down to what is a quarter section of land for a major amendment. So doing this, we've had various outreach and interaction with departments such as economic development. We've met with our development advisory board. We've had a special projects webpage that's been up since June. We also held an open house in August. And as part of that, trying to kind of address these unique times, we had a special format where it was a virtual open house that remained open for a couple weeks after the live Zoom open house. So that was open to allow additional view on the topic and provide feedback along the way. So with that, we're kind of approaching our end here with the general plan. Amendments, it's unique in that it requires 2 planning and zoning board hearings. So we think we've buttoned down those dates, but I just have on here November. They will occur in November. And then after that, we are anticipating to come back here in December for your final decision. That concludes my presentation on those amendments, and I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Rachel. I see Mr. Thompson has a question.
Thank you, Mayor. So first of all, kudos for doing this. I think this was a long time coming. My concern continues to be the mixed use piece, because in District 6, and I don't know how the other districts, because I don't really pay attention to how the other districts are developing, but in District 6, whenever you use the term mixed use, all I hear or all I end up seeing is apartments and fast food restaurants. So I would like to explore the opportunity of breaking out the multifamily piece as a completely separate zoning planning and zoning piece where you have the mixed use activity district for employment, and then you have residential, and then you have multifamily as its own category, because mixed use is so gray and so open for interpretation, right? And especially when you're saying that with the mixed use, like for example, on slide 11, when you say mixed use community, 40% of land has to be dedicated for commercial use. I mean, I would love to see that number increased. I don't think 40% is enough when you're looking at, 120 acres of multifamily. Is 40% of that use, dedicated to commercial or retail? Is that really enough? And should that number be increased? But I mean, that's my perspective from District 6. I see the growth and what's taking place, and I just cringe every time I see zoning that's in place as mixed use, because that tells me it's nothing but multifamily. That's all they're going to build there is multifamily.
Thank you. Mr. Freeman.
Thank you, Mayor. I echo Councilmember Thompson's concern. Recently, well, over the last 2 years, I've met with developers over the neighborhood village concept, and they come to my table in my office and they say they just want to put in apartments. I go, guys, that's not the neighborhood village concept. So trying to explain it to them, there seems to be a disconnect between the development community and grasping that. In fact, we even created a small PowerPoint. We went out and took pictures, and Nana helped me, and we presented that to the development community. Like, guys, this is the concept here, and it's not all apartments. There needs to be some commercial and retail type zoning in there, and I'm hoping I'm speaking on the right terms, Nana, and you can probably correct me, but it's our due diligence to create these nice areas that are able to connect neighborhoods to commercial and retail and employment if possible. And it's a little frustrating that some of the development community doesn't get it. So refining those notes, I'm in agreement with Kevin that we should look at maybe better text. Rachel, I don't know, does that make sense? I'll be quiet right now and listen to some response.
Mayor, Council, so our address, looks like there are two questions here. One is to separate apartments or multifamily uses and categorize it in a specific zoning district, and then also have commercial or other uses as a separate category. So right now, our zoning ordinance actually does that. We do have, example, the residential, medium, and single residence. Those are specifically and purely for residential developments. And then we have zoning districts such as limited commercial, general commercial, and neighborhood commercial. Those are the ones that in a certain way are deemed or termed to be mixed use. And within those, there are specific percentages of how much commercial or how much minimum residential that can be developed. So example, within the limited commercial, you have to develop 40% minimum of commercial. And then with that also, the ground floor commercial, the ground floor of every vertical building has to have commercial uses. So within that, there are percentages. But the major issue that we are facing here right now is if you look at the mixed-use activity or the neighborhood village that Vice Mayor Freeman have had great experience dealing with developers on that. The neighborhood village has a concept, generic concept. However, with a generic concept, there is no specified percentage of primary zoning, which are basically more commercial to really establish the character of the neighborhood. If you look at our character area, it does allow, example, residential, but the only way the residential is developed is through a residential zoning category. But right now, if you look at the whole character area, it doesn't say how many percentage of zoning for commercial or how many percentage of zoning for residential that can be developed. They are all lumped together. So what we are recommending is separate that out to say, example, the neighborhood village, the intent and the primary concept is for it to be a place of gathering. It's supposed to be more commercial related uses that serve the community. So your zoning which is more your commercial zoning, has to be 80% or 70%, which will form the nucleus of the character area. And after that, you can have your residential medium or single residence zoning being 20% to basically create the character or to create a complete character of the neighborhood. So we start by using the percentages in the general plan, and then we use the zoning designations to basically achieve the character of the area. And then the second question, Councilmember Thompson, is a mixed-use community. So as Rachel said, those are your planned community districts. And with those, when we get a proposal, they come in and it's basically, we start with a blanket, discussion. But with what we are proposing, and we can look into the percentages of increasing the commercial percentage if that's the direction that we receive from council. But right now, we do not have any base of commercial that is required. So if you look at your Cadence, your Eastmark, your Avalon Crossing, which are all the planned community district, there was no base minimum commercial that was required when they came in. One of the things that is also important here is the planned community district is basically negotiations between the city and then the developer or the property owner as to the right proportion of various uses that can go into it. But having been able to, or establishing a minimum commercial will ensure that there is a base to start the discussion with. And this is one area that we had extensive discussion with economic development, because those are the challenges they face. As Rachel said, some of this planned community district, they came in and had what we call a community plan that said we would do this square footage of commercial and this amount of residential, but there was no specific percentage. So as the development is progressing, they continue to come in and develop more residential, which is leaving the commercial, and we are not sure that over time, even if those commercial will be developed. But with this, we can say, well, there has to be a proportion of residential to commercial that is developed so we can track that.
Thank you. I have a question, Nana, and Rachel, the slide or the figures that jumped out to me from this presentation, I think it's been referenced a couple of times already in the questions and the comments. The 40% of master planned communities is commercial. I think, Nana, you said a moment ago that previous to this, we have not had a minimum requirement for commercial as part of a master plan community. And so I'm just thinking through, for some of the older, if you look at Dobson Ranch, it wouldn't surprise me, with all the arterials there and all the major retail on the corners. Oh, maybe there is something close to 40%. I don't know. But then when I'm just thinking of an Eastmark or a Cadence, and maybe I'm imagining this incorrectly, but I think of the beautiful entrance to the community. You drive in, and it's exclusively residential, it appears. And so maybe I'm just not giving them credit for, some of the commercial across the street or down the way. But so here, I'm sorry, this is a long-winded question. What is the mix of commercial in an Eastmark and a Cadence or a Dobson Ranch? Just give us some examples of how this has or hasn't been an issue in the past.
So, Mayor, I'll let him answer the question, but as many council members know, and I think Councilman Thompson knows, is we're losing the commercial right now. The proposals are coming in from Eastmark to reduce the commercial. And there was no percentage negotiated. It was just it was negotiated, but there was no percentage in place. But what happens over time is even the original master plan gets changed over time, because all we hear is, oh, there's no market for commercial, which, Mayor, you and I know is not true because we were in the middle of it last week, but that's the pressure we hear. What they really mean to say is we can't make as much money as fast if we do commercial, but man, we can make a whole lot of money really quickly if we do residential. Go ahead, Donna.
It's very, very well said, I think.
Okay, so that's the summary is what they would prefer not to have their feet held to the fire for a percentage of commercial because the quick, easy money is just to put up rooftops and maybe not engage in community planning to the extent we would like them to. And so I guess that you're proposing the solution to that problem.
Right.
And this, yeah.
Mayor, I think what we're doing, and I think it's a good proposal, and Nana's worked with Bill on these percentages, is that we're saying up front, let's just make sure we have a clear understanding of that percentage so that when the council approves it, it's established from the very beginning. Because unfortunately what happens, and listen, this is just the way the world is, we negotiate a master plan or one of these districts, but then 3, 4, 5 years later, they're like, well, that's really not working for us. We're really making a lot of money on multifamily. We'd like to put some more multifamily in here. And we're struggling with, well, no, we're still holding out for manufacturing, office, and recognizing even today, that's the difficulty we have today. If we got a lot of, we have some locations where we hope to have office, but obviously coming out of the pandemic, well, that's not going to happen tomorrow, maybe next year. But you know, when we do planning as a city, we think about it in the terms of 5 to 10 years, and developers, their view may be a little shorter than that. And that's the kind of push and pull that we're going through. But these adjustments or establishing the percentages, I think will help to create the expectations right at the beginning and establish those percentages which are necessary for us, because over time we end up losing, as I think Rachel showed that chart where we see higher percentages of residential. Not that we don't oppose residential, but we think to have a vibrant community that's, you know, resilient, we need to have a good mix of the commercial also.
Okay, thank you. And the other concern I think I heard expressed from council, and I'm sure they'll join in on this, was obviously right now there's tremendous market pressure to develop multifamily. You know, we're experiencing a housing shortage and an apartment shortage. I mean, occupancy rates in multifamily are 100%, it seems like. So folks that want to make money want to build multifamily right now. And I get it, and I'm not opposed to that, and particularly in some along the light rail corridors or in more urban areas where we want more density and we want to go vertical. I think, you know, I would be very supportive of that. But at the same time, I hear concern being expressed by this council, and I share it, that, you know, for a lot of brand new, you know, kind of suburban parts of the city, we're starting off with large multifamily projects. And so I'm wondering, are these amendments that you're suggesting, do they address that? Is there any staff concern for maybe too much emphasis on multifamily in some parts of, you know, newly developing areas?
Mayor, Council, so yes, majority of the issues that we are facing with excessive multifamily, this will help address it, because if you look at the character, area designations, and the percentages, for example, the various mixed use, the intent is focusing more on residential. So what we are proposing is whenever there is a proposal to rezone, we are going to look at the primary, which is more commercial. You have to have 80 or 70% based on the character designation of the primary established, or your proposal needs to include 80% or 70% of that primary before you can do the secondary, which if it's multifamily or residential. So you can, or in the future, we also don't want to totally prohibit if the character of the neighborhood or the area is formed already with a primary, then you can come in and say, well, the character has already been formed with a primary, so then now I can do the secondary. So those are the three scenarios. Your proposal either has to include the percentages, or you have to wait for the primary to be formed in the character area, and then you can do the secondary.
Okay, thank you. I know Mr. Heredia had a question, and I know some, Mr. Freeman and Luna, and looks like everybody has questions. Let's start with Frankie.
All right. Rachel, you mentioned as far as going down in some of these districts, the transit and downtown districts around to 10 acres. The effect of that is that, because in those areas, I think we're looking for mostly infill projects. We want to push the development up. Is that the effect that we want to see, or what's the thought around that piece? Of course, we don't have enough acres to go in those areas, but are we suggesting to go up in the buildings that they're building there?
Mayor, Council Member Heredia, so the intent of having a lower benchmark for the downtown area is to really preserve and protect it. So these benchmarks dictate what is a major and a minor amendment, and the difference in those is really the process that you'd have to go through to request an amendment to that. So this would be if they're coming in with a proposal that doesn't adhere to the character area, if it's 10 acres or more, that would be a major amendment, whereas before it was 320 acres all across the city, which as you can see 320 acres would cover most of the west side of Mesa. So it's really to preserve those areas and provide more oversight for the city, so that when we have proposals come in, that we can take a look at those and really provide guidance from council.
Because in this case, we believe that a smaller acreage change has a greater impact on the entire area than it would be in other parts of the city. So this is actually.
So it's our internal process that.
Well, yeah.
What it would go through.
Too, these require more extensive hearings and processes and time of review if they meet these thresholds, where today, as Rachel said, to make a change of a 10-acre area doesn't trigger any of these. But yet a 10-acre development along the transit or downtown could have a substantial impact on the remaining portions of the established development. And so the idea is to bring that threshold down, recognizing, I think, kind of Rachel said, because that how it's all of the fabric is very tightly woven together in these areas. And we want to make sure that we protect that by lowering the threshold to go through these processes if these changes come in.
Thank you. Let's go with Mr. Luna next.
Thank you, Nana and Rachel. I know many of my questions were answered. I do like the commercial aspect of it. I think having those percentages are going to be good as we move forward. But, and it's sort of related to what Councilmember Heredia had asked about 10 acres in the downtown area. Now, right now, for any minor amendment change, we have 320 acres. I would imagine that was done because you have areas like District 6 that have a lot of land. I used to have a lot of land, not so much now. So now we're proposing 160 acres. Is that correct? Is that where we're going?
Mayor, Council, that's correct.
Okay, good. I just want to make sure that was right. So that would be part of the proposal that you submitted that we would approve.
That's correct.
Okay, good. Okay, thank you.
Thank you. I know there's other council. Mr. Freeman, do you still have a question?
I didn't know if Kevin was in front of me. Kevin, you've been having your hand up quite a few times, but okay. So my question is it too much to ask, Nana, and this is probably diving into the weeds, lease rental development versus owner-occupied development? In other words, condos, owner-occupied, I'll use the word owner-occupied condos versus apartments being built. Like in my district, we're considering a large 3-story apartment complex that you're aware of. And I'm thinking, the perception is how many apartment complexes are going to go in these suburban ranch areas versus an owner-occupied type development? Can you give me some feedback on that?
Mayor, Council, I will try and then see if Jim can help me answer this question.
Yeah. Yeah. So Mayor and Council Member, first, just remember that we're talking about is the general plan, and so it's at a higher level than the actual zoning. And so I think your question is more at a zoning and site plan level type of question. But there's a state statute, and I don't remember it off the top of my head, it passed about 10 years ago, in which and the short version of it, as I remember it, is you can't treat apartments or condos differently through the zoning process, but I'll have to check on that again. But it was passed when a number of conversions of apartments were occurring to condos, and cities were, I think appropriately were concerned about this, but unfortunately the state legislature stepped in and was preventing municipalities from what I think municipalities believe was appropriate action to prevent those conversions, and passed something that prevented that. So I think we're very limited in those regards.
Okay, thank you. That's my end of my questions, Mayor.
Thank you, Mr. Thompson.
I was going to say amen to everything that Chris said earlier. And you know what? When I go back and I look at existing land uses, the slide 9, you see that pretty much everything across the board has stayed fairly consistent except for residential. And you know, I know that this council in our strategic planning session earlier this year, you know, one of the comments that we all agreed on was that we no longer wanted to be known as a bedroom community, and that we wanted to bring employment into our community. So we really need to pay attention to this land use, existing land use that MAG puts out, because it's telling a different story. It's telling me that we're headed into a bedroom. We're going to continue heading into being a community known for bedrooms. And so if there's a way that we can reduce the amount of residential and really increase the office and the commercial, industrial, I know is going to be kind of hard to grab, but you know, manufacturing and stuff like that, if we can bring those types of businesses into each of our districts, I think our citizens will benefit long term. And so that's, again, continues to be what I'm chasing, is the employment piece. And I would love to see that residential number go back down to like 39% or even lower.
Thank you. Councilmember Duff.
Yes, thank you. My question was more about the processes of the major and minor amendments. So if it's a major amendment, does that mean it goes back through planning and zoning? And if it's a minor, it's handled through staff? Or what does that mean when it's defined as a major or minor amendment?
Mayor, Council, so with a minor amendment, right now it can be reviewed together with a rezoning. One of the major difference, and I'll explain the major, is the visibility of the change. Because it can be lumped into the rezoning process, and it can be submitted throughout the whole year as well. So whenever you have a rezoning, you can request a minor general plan amendment, and then it will be reviewed as part of the rezoning. It's not required to be submitted specific time of the year, but it still goes through planning and zoning for recommendation, and then to City Council for action. With a major amendment, the state statute requires it to be submitted once a year, and the reason behind that is it gives the jurisdiction basically one time to evaluate all the changes that are probably being proposed for the whole community. If we're looking at the percentages, if they are all submitted one time, then we can see how cumulatively, if all those are approved, it's going to basically change the land use mix. So that's one, and it also requires the request to be transmitted to various jurisdictions within the area 60 days before the change. So it gives the surrounding cities and other organizations the ability to also evaluate how that changes is going to impact. And then thirdly, the meeting needs to be held at different locations as well. So the intent is to really make sure that people in the various parts of the city are well informed of that. So overall, it makes it more visible. It gives the legislative body the opportunity to really carefully evaluate it as a whole. While the minor, it can be treated with a rezoning, and sometimes we don't really or are unable to see the effect of it cumulatively.
Great, thank you for that overview. So now I'm going to ask a question that is probably, I don't know if you'll want to answer because it's more going into the housing master plan. But we have many challenges in our city. First of all, what Councilmember Thompson said, we need to increase our commercial aspect in our city. At the same time, we're facing a housing shortage, affordable housing crisis, and we want to increase ownership because that is an insulator to the escalation of rental prices. We want to be able to stabilize our neighborhoods. Do you have a recommendation in anything we can do on zoning to address these issues? Or are you, I know the recommendations you're making, I agree with them, and we are making progress, but is there something more that we can do integrated into our housing plan to address these issues?
I'm going to try to answer the first part of that. I think one of the rules we use in land use is we can encourage different characters and different types of uses, sizes and densities, but we're not allowed to consider cost. We can work on quality, but part of what our mandate has also been given from council is to improve the quality of a lot of these higher density developments, which obviously increases cost. So we don't, on this side of it, we don't necessarily look, we're not really even kind of allowed to look at the cost necessarily with the developer. We don't get into those discussions. We get into discussions about densities and use and quality is kind of where Nana and his team spend most of their time. But we don't have conversations about square footage or the cost per square footage or anything like that. And I don't know that we're allowed to do that on this side of the, in the zoning side of it.
Mayor, Council, I think one of the key points from this discussion, though, is Mesa is a population of 518. I checked the population projection this morning, and we do have adequate land dedicated for residential. So the discussion here is not saying that we want to prohibit or limit residential. We're saying that with the land use proportions right now, 43% is actually designated directly for residential, and that is really adequate. If it's all developed, that will be adequate to support our projected population. That's one. And the second part, as the city manager said, we don't look at cost, but some of the things that we do is to streamline, example, our development review process, which in a way reduces the cost of basically the review process, and time is directly related to cost. One of the things that we've also been doing and been looking into as a division or department for the past year is infill development. So right now we have a team of staff working with transportation, the various departments to make sure that we come up with a well-designed quality development for infill, which in a sense reduces the cost of construction, because within the infill areas, most of the time, you do have the infrastructure that is already there, so that will reduce the cost, but we want to make sure that the quality is not compromised, because one of the things that we faced until last year, when you approve the quality design standard, is whenever we're talking about this infill lot or small lot development, the perception is we just want to cram various amount of housing, which in effect, it doesn't even help housing affordability, because over time, those areas are run down and nobody wants to live there, or even those that invest, they don't see appreciation in their value. So we're looking at other various measures that we can directly help to really reduce the cost. But when we get a development proposal, we don't specifically ask for the price point.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Thompson.
And I was going to say too, the affordable housing piece, we talked about that a while back. I was able to go to a roundtable with Secretary Carson, And that was the one thing that we talked about was affordable housing and the barriers to affordable housing. And for us, or for the home builders, there's a multitude. It could be, the fact that the cost of labor has gone up. It could be the fact that, we still import a lot of our lumber from Canada. So trade tariffs have a great impact on the material cost. The price of land has an impact on it. Development fees have an impact on it. So there's only so much that a city can do to help lower the cost to construct a house. But ultimately, the cost is more than just development fees. It's going to be, everything that goes into building it, and predominantly it's going to be your labor cost. And so the only way that developers can really get their return on investment is to increase the price tag of the house to make up for that difference. And so that's your biggest barrier to the affordable housing piece is your labor and your material and cost of the land.
Okay, council, any other discussion? I note that this is agendized as to provide direction on a proposed text amendment. Mr. Smith, that if we're actually amending text, I mean, is it okay just for us to express a consensus, or do we need to take a vote on this?
So Mayor and Council, so staff has brought this to you before they go to the P&Z board, just so they could get direction. It's going to go back to the P&Z board, and it'll come to you as an ordinance in December. So as long as you're fine with it, they wanted to get direction before they start the whole process.
Yeah, we want to make sure before we go to P&Z, we've got we're going the right direction with the council.
Okay, good. So I think obviously that's occurred. You've gotten some good comments and direction from council. All right, the next item on our agenda is same cast of characters, same topic. So we'll see. We're got a theme for our meeting this morning. Item 1B is to hear a presentation, provide direction on proposed text amendments to the zoning ordinance, including procedures for site plan reviews.
Mayor, Council, good morning again. So as part of the plan evaluation, one of the tasks with the evaluation is for us to continue to look at our land use implementation tools and see which ones are effectively working and which ones can be streamlined to ensure that we are basically heading towards the right direction in implementing or administering the general plan. And one of the implementation tools is our site plan review. So over the years, we've had discussions with the development community, we've had discussions with the planning and zoning board as to how we can streamline the site plan review, because there are some inefficiencies, and we've also had a discussion with economic development and other transportation and other city staff that are involved. So with that, we do have a recommendation that we want to present to you. Rachel.
Okay. So the site plan review process, this really is the land use process that reviews and approves the physical development of a site. So in this, we're not approving the uses to be developed on the site, but we're looking at to make sure that there's adequate infrastructure. We're making sure that they're meeting all the requirements of the code. And through that, really trying to promote the goals of the general plan and to ensure that we have high quality development. So as Nana was saying, what we're looking at doing is looking at our processes and thinking about ways that we can improve the efficiency of these and how to improve the predictability of the process itself. So currently, the site plan review process, it goes to a public hearing, so it either gets approved by Planning and Zoning Board or City Council. But it really can be broken down into kind of two sets or two phases. So the first one is the staff review of the project itself. So this is where we're meeting with the applicant, doing revisions on the site plan to make sure that it's meeting code. And by the time that we get it to meet code, that's when we schedule it for public hearings, and that process has to do with all the public noticing, the staff report writing, and then actually going to the different bodies for consideration. What we did was we were looking at other communities to see how they handled their processes, and we found that several other communities have some minor site plan authorities that they're able to approve some site plans administratively just by staff. And so what we're recommending is that we create another process within our site plan review process for administrative site plans. And these would include uses that are permitted within the zoning district and that don't require any sort of deviation from code. We would still be requiring a notification process with this that's similar to what is required for the public hearing. So the baseline for that is a 500-foot radius for noticing. But of course, this is kind of just the baseline. And if staff feels like it's more appropriate to have a wider noticing range, we can always require that. But then, as I was mentioning, within this process, we'd be able to do administrative approval by the planning director. And then the other side of that would be just kind of your standard site plan review process that would mimic the procedures that we follow today. But the site plans that would go through this would be the uses that require a public hearing. So if we have something that is associated with the rezone, it's requiring some deviations to code, it's requiring a council use permit, those would accompany those other public hearing processes so that council and planning and zoning can look at all as a comprehensive piece. And what we see that we can do with this is that there would be opportunity to provide quite a bit of time savings as far as reviewing and approving some of these plans. And what these timeframes up on the screen, these are kind of just the baselines, assuming that we get the first round of reviews and we give comments back to the applicant and they can turn it around and address all of our comments and meet code. But as you can see, if we're able to approve some of those administratively, we can cut down anywhere from 20 to 50 days out of this process. But again, that varies depending on the number of reviews needed. But with the administrative review, it also gives us a little bit more flexibility. So with our current process, we're really are dictated by noticing requirements. And so that time frame is a lot more stringent on that back end. So when I was talking, showed a slide earlier of where it has the 2 phases, that second phase, that's pretty set because that's determined by state law as far as noticing requirements. But if we have an administrative site plan review, this would also give us opportunity in some instances to provide a little bit of flexibility and be able to expedite things in some situations. So similar to the other projects that we're working on, we have been going and discussing this concept with the Planning and Zoning Board a couple times. We've been to the Developers Advisory Forum a couple times to discuss this. This was part of the open house that we held in August and also part of that virtual open house that had all of our special projects on it. So right now we do have a draft online that's available to the public, and we have a finalized draft now. That was a draft that's online, but we have a pretty finalized draft now that we are planning on taking to Planning and Zoning Board on September 24th. Or I'm sorry, October 28th, and then back to council in November and December for final action. So I'd be happy to answer any questions on that.
Thank you, Rachel. I know we have some more questions. Mr. Luna, followed by Mr. Thompson.
Hi, Rachel. Thanks for the presentation. So essentially, if a developer comes in, he's got a great plan, and he meets all the criteria, check the boxes, he's done all of this. So you're requesting that if it meets the criteria, no need for a public body, another additional public body to review the plan, that administratively we could take care of that. I think that's what you're trying to say. I know that in my district, I'm sure it happens to all of us, that a developer wants to come in, wants to get the thing, wants to get the project going immediately, but then there's hindrance because there's that 90-day delay. So you're saying if a developer comes in, has a good plan, meets all the requirements, and then you approve them. So that's the process that we're working towards. Is that correct?
Mayor, Council, yes, and let me add to it. So what we are requesting or proposing is whenever a developer comes in, the use is totally allowed, it's a permitted use. They meet all the setback requirements, they meet the landscaping requirements, they meet every requirement, then it's approved administratively. And also we will notify residents. This is one of the discussions as we discuss internally, that we want to make sure that the surrounding residents are notified. And then if they have any comment earlier on, they can provide that to staff and then to the developer. So those issues will be addressed. So that's one. And this is a lengthy discussion that the Planning and Zoning Commission actually have been having with staff, that those come to them and they literally don't have any input because all the boxes are checked. So why are we spending the time when we can spend more time to discuss some of the policy adjustment, or we can discuss with them some of the things that we are not able to put out on the agenda, and also the investment of staff time and writing reports and all that, whilst we can streamline the process. And finally, that flexibility is very critical, because I know with discussion with economic development, sometimes we are competing with another city or jurisdiction, and the time of approval is very critical to whether the project gets built in Mesa. And being able to have that opportunity will really make us more competitive. But at the end of the day, it's also critical to know that staff has the opportunity or ability to refer the case to Planning and Zoning Board and possibly to City Council if there are other things beyond just the use being permitted, or if we feel like this is something that needs to be deferred to the P&Z, we have the ability to do that as well.
I know that, I've had several projects where we've had some challenges because it has to go through planning and zone. I appreciate planning and zoning, what they do. But if we can skip that process, if they're going to look and say, hey, what are we reviewing this? It's met all the requirements. I have no issue with doing administrative approval, especially with things when a project is timely. They want to get it done quickly. It's an allowed use. It meets the requirements. They've done some of the public outreach. So I'm going to be supportive of this. Thank you, Mayor.
Mayor,
Thank you.
we would just add also, I think it creates an incentive for the developer to stick within the original plans. And because if they know that they can save months, weeks to get this through, that incentive for them to kind of consider whether or not they really want to make that change or not, that will be significant, I think, if they say, well, wait a minute, if I stay consistent with what was already known, I can get this through a lot faster. I think that incentive is really critical also in this process.
Thank you. Mr. Thompson.
Well, I have a couple of issues, and my first question is kind of going to lead into my second question. So there's times when development may meet a permitted use, but it doesn't meet the characteristics of the community. And a perfect example is a developer that wants to come in and put a storage facility or a car wash on a major corner right next to a residential development. And we've had numerous circumstances when that has happened. And even though it's an allowed use, it doesn't really meet the characteristics of the community or the neighborhood. So I get a little bit hesitant sometime on the administrative site plan because again, I think each of us has a vision for what we're trying to accomplish in our district. And
so Councilor Thompson, it would be automatic. Obviously, we've had these discussions with you on those particular uses. So Nana's a pretty sharp young man, and I think he would.
And that's where that's kind of where it's leading
Yeah.
from my second question, is that we had worked, or I'd come to P&Z and I think to legal as well, and I think Councilmember Luna and I both, and we had some concerns about the assisted living and the self-storage and the car washes that were wanting to pop up on every single corner. And we were looking to add ordinances or some type of something in place that would limit the number of or locations where they could be built. Have we made any headway on any of those?
Mayor, Council, yes. So there is a scheduled study session next week, Councilmember Thompson, to address some of your major concerns when it comes to assisted living and the RV and boat storage at certain locations. And Councilmember Heredia, also your issue with mini storages as well. So we are going to be addressing those because we believe that those are critical for council to be comfortable with those uses at certain places. So we take it from the specific or directly permitted uses, which will allow the administrative process. We're going to basically recommend those to become council use permits. So you'll be able to see those. So that will address almost your concern with those uses that you have specific issues with.
Okay, that's perfect, because I know that, Nana, you and I have had numerous discussions over, the difference between permitted use and what meets the characteristics of a community and the expectations that our citizens have for development. So I want to make sure that we have a little more control over, and the community has a little more control over what builds in our community, right? At the end of the day, we represent the citizens. And we need to make sure that they're comfortable with what's coming in, even though it may be permitted by zoning, it may not be the best thing for the community.
So Councilor Thompson, maybe the requirement we should say is on the administrative review, not only do we notify the residents, but we'll make sure we notify the city council member for that district, which I think is a given. But then it gives you a chance to tell us whether or not you're comfortable with that moving forward with administrative review. And if not, then we'll take it through the normal process. But we're completely comfortable with the idea that these should also be given to the city council for that district to review also.
Right, and I think Nana's group does a really good job on, sending out the pre-submittals. I get those all the time, and I see those, and I look at them, and I post them on my Facebook page so that the community can see what's coming or what's being planned. But there's a lot of stuff that I don't necessarily see, especially if it's infill. We don't necessarily get notified, and so I think it's important that we know what's coming, and so that we can identify whether it's meeting the intent of the character of the community. So that's all. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Freeman.
Yes, going back to the notification, the proposed 500 foot slide, I guess one of the chief complaints in my district is we don't notify it. Our bandwidth is not wide enough. And I think, Rachel, you said, well, it might be staff's perspective or to increase that on an as needed basis. But some of the area I represent, they could be larger homes in the area and, wider frontages and less people are notified. How can we manage that a little better to increase that notification?
Mayor, Councilmember Freeman, that's exactly why staff has that discretion to increase that notification radius. Is because, in some instances we have larger lots and 500 feet will reach, one or two property owners. And in those instances, we really rely on staff to use their judgment to say, well, that's really not notifying the surrounding neighbors, so that we need to increase that to, 1,000 feet. So that really it's addressed by staff at that level, but the 500 feet is just a base requirement.
Would you be better having a wider width as a template, or instead of 500, make it 1,000? I'm just asking the question.
I would say we don't get a lot of response on these, to be honest. So the 500 foot is what's required today. But what we're saying is we're going to do the minimum, but we want to have the opportunity, the discretion to go beyond that if we need to. These are site plan reviews. It's not a zoning change. So it's usually doesn't get a lot of attention unless it's been a controversial project, probably from the beginning, I suspect. These are pretty, to be honest, that's why we're presenting this to you, is these are very administrative, yet the administrative portion of this now takes several weeks to get through, and the development community sometimes becomes very frustrated because they're like, well, I've submitted the site plan, that's exactly what everybody talked about, it's been processed. Now you're telling me I have to wait another, 90 days or whatever it was. So we're trying to respond to the community and yet at the same time have full disclosure. So we're trying to create that balance.
Mayor Council.
All right.
So
Go ahead.
the notification is just one process. We also, in most instances, do require a neighborhood meeting to be held before they even submit the application. So that helps those beside or beyond the 500 feet to be notified as well. And in addition, the major community groups within those areas are also notified. So homeowners association or certain groups that are within that. So there is more notification. In addition, the property is posted. And in addition, there is a newspaper publication, which I think we need to work on as a planning profession because nobody reads them very much. But there are so many other notification processes that people are informed of the change or any development.
Very good. Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Heredia.
Yeah, just curious, you showed the bar graph as far as the number of days it takes to approve or get through the process. Wondering if what's with this change, how much percentage wise would it, what's a caseload as far as percentage wise that you're looking at, and do we have the adequate staffing internally to deal with that caseload? As I would imagine, the administrative changes would be falling into staff, and getting those approved internally will require a lot of staff time.
Mayor Council, so we're already doing that. Before we schedule it before the Planning and Zoning Board, we do all the administrative review. So this is actually going to really release staff to be able to focus on other things, because we also have to hold the meetings. We have to prepare all the other things that goes on with holding the meetings. We have to prepare extensive staff report and all that. So there is almost about 55% of workload that is going to be cut off with that if we go through that administrative review process.
Essentially, you're just doing the first.
So the workload would reduce, Nana?
So, yes.
So, Councilmember, at that chart you're looking at, what we're essentially saying is we would just, that administrative bar is really, that's the extent of what would have to happen. We wouldn't then have to take it, the planning, zoning, and then bring it to council. And a lot of times those delays are just scheduling the meetings, it's the notices that give out. And Nana is also responding to P&Z Commission themselves, who are saying, why are these coming before us? Why are we spending time on this? And so we're trying to find an efficient way that doesn't take away from the notification and the opportunity for public input, but we're still doing all the thorough review by the staff. That doesn't change. It's having to get the approvals over and over again.
Okay.
Okay, thank you. I have, I think, just one quick question. Ultimately, in looking at that chart, City Council still does review these. I mean, even if we've kind of expedited some of the administrative review to, and to give some relief to the development community for the tremendous amount of time it takes to develop a project right now. Still, I mean, we're not eliminating from the process. Ultimately, the City Council approves site plans, correct?
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Yeah. Mayor, Council, so as City Manager said, where they're asking for modifications or changes, that will go through the planning and zoning and come to City Council. So the administrative review is you come in, you meet everything perfect, you have a great team, then administratively it's approved.
So you wouldn't need to go, it wouldn't go to
Okay.
P&Z, and it would not go to council, Mayor.
Got it.
That's the change.
Okay. Yeah. Well, I'm mixed. I have mixed levels of comfort with this, because I think 9 out of 10 of these projects that's appropriate, and this is reducing bureaucracy and time, and I support that. But there are occasionally, as has as the council has pointed out, controversial projects that the community is upset with, and we need to subject those projects to additional scrutiny. And we need to hear,
The zoning.
kind of have a political check the box occur on some of these projects. So is there a trigger? I think you're about to tell me, if we can see that this is a project that's got some community concern, it's jumped out of the fast track over to, some additional public scrutiny?
Yeah, so Mayor, there's very few site plans that come to council. Most of what you're weighing in on is the zoning case itself and all the conditions and that are put on that. And then the site plan will come after that. And so I can't even, I'm trying to imagine even a time that the council's had to pause and have a conversation about a site plan. Certainly zoning cases the council gets involved in. I don't even remember, when do site plans come to council?
That's years ago.
So, and Mayor and Council, many times you'll see a site plan with a rezoning because they'll show you a site plan with the rezoning, but a site plan only case, there's only a few of those in which they come to council. It's usually because there's an original stip on the zoning ordinance that says that future site plans have to go to council. So if they have that stipulation on the original zoning, it comes back to council. There's a few other circumstances, but a site plan only case is not very common. They go to planning and zoning right now.
Okay, thank you. Well, I appreciate that. That gives me more comfort with this. It sounds like this is really just, eliminating some administrative review or, so having heard that explanation, I'm more comfortable with this. Council, other discussion on this item?
Mayor, Council, one of the take that we also want to express that we will inform the council before we do the administrative review. So we will streamline our kind of relaying the information and the application to the council so we know where the council person stands before we make our decision.
Thank you. Again, this is agendized to provide direction on this proposed text amendment. Is there any additional scrutiny that this is going to go through, or did you receive from us the direction that you need, or Mr. Smith, do we need to do anything more formal?
No, that's good, Mayor. Thank you.
All right, thank you. The next item on our agenda, Council, is item 2. That's to acknowledge receipt of board minutes. Is there a motion to that effect? Thank you, Mr. Thompson. And a second by Mr. Freeman. We'll do a roll call vote. Vice Mayor Freeman, how do you vote?
Aye.
Thank you. Mr. Whitaker is excused. Mr. Heredia, how do you vote?
Aye.
Thank you. Councilmember Duff.
Aye.
I fed her, honey.
Thank you. Mr. Luna.
Aye.
Thank you. Mr. Thompson.
Aye.
Thank you. And I vote aye as well, so that passes unanimously. Item 3 is a current event summary and reports on meetings and conferences attended. Council, anything? Yes, Mr. Thompson.
I was going to throw out there congratulations to our spring training team, the Oakland A's, for clinching the American League West in this short season. So they are #1 in the American League West.
And hopefully we'll have another World Series trophy to show off at spring training this year. Councilmember Duff.
Yes, I wanted to share that yesterday I attended a virtual art walk celebrating the Guerrero Park mural project that ULI had led. And so we had a Zoom celebration. Actually, this project, it was awarded among all the ULI districts, the Urban Land Institute districts across the nation, as the top project for neighborhood revitalization. And so we are very proud of the work that is done. We had some significant supporters of the project, including the Flynn Foundation and John Graham, among many others. The artists worked under the direction of Hugo Mendina, which he's quite an artist, and we use Mesa artists. The residents told their stories about their neighborhood and their culture, and those were created into a mural project. And we have like 1,800 linear feet of murals in the Guerrero Park district. About 200 residents participated in painting the murals. The artist designed it and instructed the residents and community where to paint this. So it was a tremendous project. And even though we weren't able to celebrate by actually walking through, we saw a video of all the project. And there will be an upcoming scavenger hunt for residents to drive through and answer questions or understand more of the stories behind the murals. There's been quite a bit on social media, and the city has a video on this project, but I just wanted to say thank you to ULI, all the supporters, artists, residents, for being part of this project and making it quite a success. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilmember Duff. I know you played a critical role in that project as well, and it turned out beautifully. So I hope the whole community can go visit Guerrero Park and appreciate the great murals that turned out there. The idea of a scavenger hunt is really, I think, quite clever. That maybe all of us can, find different things on those murals, and that sounds like a fun way to explore those murals. So thank you for your hard work on that, Councilmember Duff. Council, other comments under this section? Yes, Mr. Luna.
Thank you, Mayor. Yesterday, I was invited to participate on a panel from the Western Division of the National League of Cities. Basically, it covered the Western states. So they asked questions relative to my involvement on the National League of Cities and my participation in HELO and all that entails. The whole idea is to encourage people to get involved. There's some leadership opportunities that have come available, so they're encouraged cities to get their councils involved in the National League of Cities. So essentially that was the purpose of the conference, and it was a lot of fun to be able to represent the city of Mesa as well as be a panelist for the National League of Cities. Thank you, Mayor.
Thank you, Mr. Luna. Thank you for being a national leader in that organization. You do us proud. Councilmember Duff.
Yes, I'll go ahead and share it. I wasn't sure if Vice Mayor Freeman wanted to say something, but this afternoon at 4 p.m., Vice Mayor Freeman and I are hosting a community conversation, and we will have transportation doing a presentation on the upcoming bond project. So they'll be presenting all the projects that are on there and answering questions for our constituents so they can learn more about that and understand more so for their voting. Thank you.
Thank you. That's a good opportunity for you. I mean, if there are folks in the community that would like to know more about the transportation bond, the city, council members and the mayors would love to come out and make presentations to, I guess we can't campaign, but well, I guess actually we can, but we won't use Channel 11 to campaign, but certainly if folks want to know more about that, I think all of us would be anxious to come out and as you and Mr. Freeman are doing today and offer the details of that proposal. Council, other comments? Okay, seeing none, that can, Mr. Brady, can you help us with the schedule of future meetings?
Yes, thank you, Mayor. Just a reminder, we'll have a study session on Thursday, October 1st. That will follow by an Audit and Finance Enterprise Committee meeting. Also a reminder to the council, this Saturday, September 26th, from 9 to noon is the next free flu shot and COVID testing at Lincoln Elementary School. That's located at 930 South Serine. I am also want to report that we got the results from the previous testing we did last week, and we did have confirmation of 3 positive COVID and 2 in the same family. So hopefully we got that information to them quickly to help the spread. So we are hopefully seeing the benefit of these COVID testing that we're doing in the community. Thank you.
Great. If I remember correctly, Mr. Brady, there were over 200 tests. So
yeah,
3 out of 200 is not a bad rate.
Nope, it's pretty good. Thank you. Yes.
Okay. Thank you. All right, council, that concludes our agenda for this meeting. Is there a motion to adjourn?
Mayor, quickly, we will convene our public safety meeting at 9 o'clock. Give us a 5-minute break. And just want to let my colleagues, Vice Mayor Freeman and Mr. Thompson. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Luna. All right, I think Mr. Thompson made the motion to adjourn. Is there a second?
Second.
Thank you, Mr. Luna. We'll do a voice vote. All in favor of adjourning this meeting, please indicate by saying aye. Aye.
Aye.
Thank you. Any opposed? Thank you. We are adjourned.